Final Fantasy is more than just a game. It's a legend. A single game that defied logic and persevered against all odds to create a 28-year-long legacy that has spawned 17 main games, countless side games, spin-offs, remakes, reimaginings, Final Fantasy games that don't have the brand name but are definitely Final Fantasy games, and even games with the brand name that aren't actual Final Fantasy games. This series covers more ground in America than any other Japanese RPG, simply dominating American culture to such an extent that it's a household name even if you haven't played a single Japanese role-playing game. You may not have played a Final Fantasy, but you've heard the name before, and you know the brand means business. I've been a fan of Final Fantasy ever since I was very young. While I haven't played every single game in the franchise yet, I own all of the main titles, a few of the side games, and go out of my way to play the HD remakes when they come out. I have fallen in love with the rich worlds, engaging characters, and intricate stories that these games create. With that being said, Final Fantasy has just as many detractors as it does fans. There are many people who don't like these games, and that's perfectly fine. They aren't exactly perfect games, and there are plenty that are rather experimental at best. There are also many fans of the series who can't stand the main entries in the franchise past the halfway point because of the rampant shift in tone and gameplay. In fact, after Final Fantasy VI, the series undergoes a transformation, evolving into a very different beast entirely. But then again, Final Fantasy has changed heavily with each game. It's possibly one of the few RPGs besides the Tales series where there's little to no direct sequels. Each game tells a separate story, and each game tries new gameplay ideas to mixed success. But to me, that's the charm of Final Fantasy. You never know what you're going to get, and even when the concepts and ideas don't always work, they're different enough to make the game stand out. Sure, there are a few games in the series I didn't want to play more than once, but I'm glad I did to see a new change to the tried and true formula. You really don't get that with most mainstream games. Much like my History of One Piece series, we have a lot to cover here, and it's going to take some time to touch upon everything in this series with the amount of depth that the series deserves. However, my more impatient fans shouldn't worry too much, because there are several factors that make Final Fantasy easier to cover than One Piece. First of all, since most Final Fantasy games have self-contained narratives, I will be able to cover each game separately instead of each story arc, and since many of the early games are rather short and don't contain as much story, these videos will be shorter and easier to produce as a result. Granted, the stories get longer and longer with each game, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Hang on a minute there, Zenith.
Hi, can I help you?
Yes, as a matter of fact, you can. How about you tell me what makes you so qualified to take on the entire Final Fantasy series?
What? I don't quite follow you on this one.
Look, there's dozens of other game reviewers out there, most of whom have covered Final Fantasy already. So what makes you so qualified to take on an entire series that's considered by many gamers to be the king of all RPGs?
Have you seen my collection of Final Fantasy games? I know Final Fantasy like the back of my hand.
Is that so? Riddle me this then. How many forms does Kefka have in Final Fantasy VI?
That's an easy one. Kefka has 4 forms in Final Fantasy VI, and they symbolize one ascending to heaven as you fight your way through the ranks.
Where do you find the optional boss in Final Fantasy IX, and what is its name?
The optional boss is Ozma, and you find it in the Chocobo Air Garden. You have to complete the Chocobo digging mini-games and level up to a golden Chocobo to get there. Come on, give me something really challenging.
Okay, you want hard, I'll give you hard. Name, in order, every limit break that Cloud possesses in Final Fantasy VII, and how you obtain them.
Alright, well, let's see here. You start off with Braver, then there's Cross Slash, which you get after using Braver 8 times. There's Blade Beam, which you get after killing 80 enemies. Clim Hazard, which you get after using Blade Beam 7 times. And Meteor Rain, you get that after killing another 80 enemies. Then there's Finishing Touch, which you get after using Meteor Rain 6 times. And then there's the mother of all limit breaks, Omni Slash, which you obtain in the battle arena after getting 64,000 points on Disc 1 or 32,000 on Discs 2 and 3. Satisfied?
Okay, you know your stuff, I'll give you that. But I'm still not convinced this retrospective's in capable hands.
Okay then, Mr. Skeptic. What do you have to say about Final Fantasy I?
It's a good game. It's lots of fun. Every gamer should play it.
Is there a reason you interrupted this retrospective? Other than to waste my time?
Oh, I'm playing Internet Reviewer Bingo. Hang on just a second. Let's see. Angrily interrupt another reviewer's video. Check. What else? Pointless use of Raul Julia Street Fighter clip.
Of course!
Check. Great, now all I need is overly complicated storyline that the fanbase thinks is self-indulgent and stupid, and I win $50.
Come on, man. This is a retrospective, not a review. We don't do storylines here.
Not according to the review court.
Review court? The hell's that?
Wait a minute, hang on. You've been doing this longer than I have, and you don't know about review court. Ho ho, are you in trouble?
Come on, what are you gonna do? Sue me or something? I mean, I'm not exactly worth all that much money, to be honest.
Me? Nah. Review court does its own enforcement. Just expect things to get a little weird once this video goes live. Anyway, I gotta run. I gotta figure this whole convoluted storyline thing out. Maybe I'll watch a couple of dozen of Linkara's videos or something. Good luck!
Well, anyway, with all of that being said, welcome everyone to my Final Fantasy retrospective, where I explore the highs and lows, the countless array of characters, and the ever-changing formula that is Final Fantasy. Hello everyone, I am Zenith Will Rule, and welcome to the Final Fantasy Retrospective, where I explore the history of the Final Fantasy franchise and analyze each and every game in the series. There's a lot of games to cover here, but today I'm going to talk about the game that started it all, Final Fantasy I.
And so, Zenith's journey began. The Warrior of Light felt overwhelmed by the great task destiny had placed upon him. He did not know the true significance of the crystals he held in his hand. The crystals that once, long ago, shone with a light so brilliant. The time for his journey had come. The time to cast off the veil of darkness and bring the world once more into the light.
Final Fantasy I, also known as Final Fantasy, is an interesting beast with a lot of history behind it. Back in 1987, there was a small company known only as Square that wasn't doing very well. The company, founded in 1983, had created quite a few games beforehand, including Thexter, King's Knight, the 3D battles of World Runner, Rad Racer, and JJ Tobidase Daisakusen Part 2, but none of these were very successful. In fact, the only early success Square had was with two of its PC titles. The Death Trap and Will the Death Trap 2 both sold over 100,000 copies, which was very impressive for the time, but successive games did not yield the same result. Square was heading for bankruptcy until they had one big lucky break. Dragon Quest was released in Japan.
今、新しい伝説が生まれようとしている。Enix.
Now, this may seem unrelated, but Dragon Quest, created by rival company Enix, single-handedly rescued Square from bankruptcy. They only had enough funds left to make one final game, and if that wasn't a success, Square was going to close its doors. At the same time, Hironobu Sakaguchi was an employee at Square. He had wanted to make a role-playing game for a long time, but Square turned him down repeatedly because nobody expected an RPG to sell. There was a stigma around RPGs in Japan at the time, and that was a risk that Square wasn't willing to take. That is, until Dragon Quest came out and dominated the market. Dragon Quest, known as Dragon Warrior in America, is one of the single most influential games of all time. Not only was Dragon Quest a critical and financial success, but it created a new genre. This may seem crazy to some, but Dragon Quest was the first console RPG. This kind of game had never been done before on home systems, and Dragon Quest paved the way for many future console RPGs to come. And that's where Final Fantasy comes in. They witnessed the success of Dragon Quest firsthand, and finally Square allowed Sakaguchi to create his RPG. At first, the game was supposed to be titled Fighting Fantasy, but was changed to Final Fantasy during development for one simple reason. Even with the success of Dragon Quest, nobody at Square expected their latest game to be a success. Their studio was in a lot of debt, and it would take a miracle for them to bounce back from it. Still, while the employees at Square packed their bags, they put all their effort into their final project. If this was going to be the only RPG they worked on, it would be something worth talking about, damn it. This is why the game was called Final Fantasy. They fully expected this to be the last fantasy they ever created. It would be their literal Final Fantasy. And thus, Final Fantasy I was created, shipped out to the Japanese populace, and the rest is history. The game was a huge success, selling over 500,000 copies, more than 5 times their most successful PC title. Square had found its flagship franchise, and it was ready to create many more. An interesting thing to note here is that while they didn't believe Final Fantasy would be a success, Sakaguchi convinced management to ship 200,000 more copies than initially planned so that they could garner enough fans for a sequel. Even at that early stage, he had plans in place for Final Fantasy II. No, not that Final Fantasy II. There you go. Anyway, let's dive further into Final Fantasy I and see how it holds up after all these years.
The 勇者たちが今ニューファミコンに出会う。ニューファミコンで蘇る 伝説の物語攻略本付きファイナルファンタジー1、2一つになってアンコール発売。
The first thing you have to understand about Final Fantasy I is how it was designed. Akitoshi Kawazu, who is mainly responsible for the battle system and sequences, heavily based Final Fantasy on Dungeons and Dragons, and it shows in spades. Up until this point, RPGs in Japan didn't include elemental weaknesses that enemies could have, such as water enemies being weak to lightning. Because Kawazu was a huge fan of these systems in Western RPGs, he brought them into Final Fantasy and pioneered a staple of gaming that we take for granted. Kawazu also pioneered another system for Final Fantasy, the ability to choose your character class. Much like in Dungeons & Dragons, at the start of the game you can choose between 6 different characters for each of the 4 members of your party. This gives you complete control over the way you play the game, and ensures you will never have the exact same experience as other players because there's 360 different party permutations to choose from. It is simply an ingenious system, really, and one of the core reasons why Final Fantasy I still holds up to this day. Even if you beat the game with one party, there's always another party you can try out. The choice of characters are pretty well balanced as well. First off, there's the fighter, or warrior as he's known in the remakes, a character that specializes in both offense and defense. Warriors can equip the best swords in the game to deal massive damage, while still being able to equip heavy armor and shields to heavily reduce damage taken. A warrior is essential to most parties, especially because the armor you get late in the game makes most attacks against him completely useless. The warrior is simply a walking tank, and I always keep one in my party. Next up, there's the black mage, which specializes in offensive spells, the white mage, which specializes in healing magic and defensive spells, and the red mage, which can cast all magic regardless of type. Now, I know many people prefer the red mage because he can heal you while throwing fireballs at enemies, but I find the red mage to be a bit too limited. You see, spells in Final Fantasy are categorized by their level, and you can only buy 3 spells per level. This is completely fine with black and white mages because they only have 3 to 4 spells to choose from at each shop, but red mages have twice the spells to choose from and only half the inventory space to house them in. Whenever I use him, I just feel like I'm restricted a bit too much, because I always want the best magic I can get, and there's always something you sacrifice for the red mage. Granted, using him opens up a free space for another class, but still I prefer using black and white mages. It's just my more comfortable method. Then there's the monk, or black belt as he's known in the original game. I freaking love this guy. He's honestly my favorite character in the game, hands down. Sure, he can't equip heavy armor or any shields, but that's just it. The beauty of the monk is that he doesn't need to. He is a complete badass without even needing any of these things. You see, many people make the mistake of just buying nunchaku for him, but that actually reduces his effectiveness. Simply leave the monk unarmed, and in a few levels, he will hit harder than the warrior. I am completely serious here. You can save a ton of money on him and spend that on spells and equipment for other characters. Sure, he doesn't have as high defense as the rest of the party, but one hit, just one, and everything will fall before the mighty monk. He's my 4th in any party I create because he is just that good. Last, and unfortunately least, we have the thief. Now, don't get me wrong, The thief is indeed balanced. He has high evasion and can dodge most attacks, and his steal skill is useful, but that's it. He has horrible attack and defense, he gets the worst gear of the party, and I never felt the need to use steal. Also, in the NES version of the game, he didn't even have a steal skill. His special ability was to run away from battle with his high agility, but even that had a bug that only allowed it to work some of the time.
That don't impress me much.
Now, I know some people just simply love this guy, but I just always feel like he's the weak link. No magic, no attack, only evasion and a skill that only helps some of the time. I'm sorry, but I never use him, and I don't feel he's worth playing as. Now, this is where I normally talk about the personality and characteristics of the main characters, but this is the first small problem I have with Final Fantasy I. There is absolutely no personality for any of these characters. They're all different in terms of appearance and what they specialize in, but they have no backstories, personality traits, quirks, or even dialogue. They are self-insert characters where you are supposed to project yourself upon the character, and I don't think that really works here. To be fair, Dungeons & Dragons employs a similar idea when you create your character. You set your alignment, your skill points, roll up your character, and the whole time you are crafting your backstory, personality, and everything else that makes your character special to you. That works for D&D for two reasons. One, you can be a mouthpiece for your character. You make its decisions, talk to NPCs, and shape your character's interactions with your own voice. This is partially present in Final Fantasy because you can go around and interact with other NPCs, but your character is silent. There's not even a dialogue bubble showing what you're asking these characters. It's nice to be able to talk to them, but without an actual voice for your character, it doesn't feel as personal when you interact with them. Second of all, D&D shapes the story around your character through the Dungeon Master. The DM takes your character info, backstory, and personality into account and shapes a story around them. If you act stupid, the DM changes the story to reflect that. You could get into a bar fight and lose vital info. Every single interaction means a lot in D&D. Now, when I play D&D, I like to play a rampant drunk cleric who tries to save people with religion. He's an outrageous character where a single action, just one single action, can lead to some hilarious scenarios each time. But this can't happen in Final Fantasy. The story is always the same, and the way people interact with the party is always the same. Granted, the technology was limited at the time, and they couldn't tailor the story to you, but it just feels like something is missing here. I think the class system is brilliant, but I always thought of them as classes and not characters. It's only a small detriment considering the amount of choices available, but personally I prefer later games in the series where they perfect this formula. On the other hand, one thing I will praise about the characters is their design. Yoshitaka Amano created the character designs for Final Fantasy, and he simply did an amazing job making each character stand out. Even with the limitations of the time, each class is easily recognizable, and anyone can tell with a glance which class someone has in their party at any given time. Not only that, but his designs have become an iconic symbol of this series. The signature white robe with red triangles for the white mage has been used time and time again for each subsequent Final Fantasy as the universal symbol for a white mage. The black mage design has been universally accepted as the template for a black mage, and not just in Final Fantasy. These designs are simply wonderful and became one of the major symbols of Final Fantasy I. Just about every Final Fantasy fan that I know has artwork of these characters somewhere in their room because of their iconic status. As for me, I have perler bead versions of them because it perfectly captures the 8-bit aesthetic of their designs. What's interesting about these designs is that Amino almost never got a chance to make them in the first place. Initially, Sakaguchi didn't want to hire Amino for this project because he had never heard Amino's name before. Sakaguchi only hired Amino for the project when he found some drawings Amino had done on magazine clippings. He told fellow producer Koichi Ishii that this was the art style he was looking for. Ishii revealed that they were created by Amino, and thus Amino was immediately hired for the position. If not for that incredible stroke of luck, we wouldn't have these iconic images in the rest of Final Fantasy. That's pretty crazy. I think I've talked about the characters long enough though. Let's take a look at one of the most important aspects of any Final Fantasy. The story of Final Fantasy I was written by freelance writer Kenji Terada based on Sakaguchi's original story concept. However, while Terada worked on the writing, Koichi Ishii had a huge influence on the set pieces of Final Fantasy. For example, it was Ishii who came up with the idea of the crystals, a concept that has become a staple of the series. The story begins with text over a blue screen of death,
the blue screen of death, my mortal enemy,
telling us that the world is in peril.
The world is veiled in darkness. The wind stops. The sea is wild, and the earth begins to rot. The people wait. Their only hope, a prophecy. When the world is in darkness, 4 warriors will come. After a long journey, 4 young warriors arrive, each holding an orb.
That is, unless you play one of the numerous remakes, in which case it opens with a badass cutscene, followed by the opening text and a background that illustrates what happens in the text. While I do see the novelty of the original, the remake does it much better. After starting a new game at the title screen and choosing your party, you find yourself in a strange new land. You spy a town in the distance, so you go inside to see what you can find. The town is small, containing a few talkative villagers, a church, a spell shop, an armor shop, a weapons shop, and a castle. Since you have no funds at the moment, you travel to the castle and talk to the king inside. When the king finds out that all 4 members of your party have crystals, he exclaims that they must be the 4 warriors of light. An ancient prophecy tells of 4 crystal bearers who will return light to the crystals, defeat the forces of darkness, and save the world from destruction. However, the crystals you hold in your hand have dulled. You're not ready to save the world just yet, but the king asks you instead to save his daughter, who's been kidnapped by Garland. Garland was once the strongest knight in the kingdom, but he's been corrupted by the forces of evil, and it's up to you to take him down. After a few hours of level grinding and getting better gear for your characters, you journey north to the Temple of Fiends, where Garland is holding the king's daughter hostage. You bust down the door to the temple like a badass, where Garland is waiting for you.
Oh, hi, Mark.
In a single moment of sheer brilliance, he then exclaims,
"I, Garland, will knock you all down."
That's Disney evil.
This line of dialogue is an awesome moment where you can truly tell the translators didn't have a firm grasp of English when porting over the game to America, and yet they still keep this line in the remakes because it is just that iconic. After that bold declaration, the battle with Garland begins. Now, I just know I'm going to get a copyright claim for this, but this fight simply must be accompanied by the appropriate music.
Your defense is weak, fight it's tougher than you. Good night, terminate, good night for you. Surrender, the princess will surrender your life for light speeds ahead of you. Now lead on my night.
Oh, for the love of Christ, I had to use that clip, YouTube. Hold on just one sec, guys. I'm gonna try to fix this.
I, Garland, will knock you all down.
I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never gonna keep me down.
Anyway, like I was saying, the battle with Garland begins, but he shouldn't pose much of a threat at this point in the game. Once you knock him down a peg, you are transported back to the castle, and the king rewards you by repairing the bridge to the next area. Now, that does make sense in video game logic, but thinking about it right now, that's really rather lazy of him. Why hasn't he repaired the bridge before now? I imagine him just sitting on his throne thinking, well, I could have it repaired, but that would cost me so much money to pay the townsfolk. I'll just wait for the Warriors of Light to show up.
My plan is great.
Also, a lot of innocent people died.
Yes, there was a little collateral damage, probably not important.
From here, the game is pretty straightforward. You can go around and explore as much as you want, but you'll eventually come to the next town. This place is overrun by pirates, so you take them out and you get yourself a pirate ship.
Yar har, favorite indeed. Being a pirate is a right indeed. Do what you want, cause a pirate is free. You are a pirate.
From here, you can travel to any town you visited before, but to progress, you head to the south and you find a third town. After some more level grinding and purchasing new supplies, you enter the castle to find that the elven prince inside has been cursed with the sleeping death. He cannot awaken from his slumber unless the spell is broken. So you head out to find a way to wake him up. And here is where the game gets far too complicated for its own good. Up until this point, you should be able to find out where to go and what to do with just a small bit of exploration. Everything is sectioned off so you don't stray from the task at hand, while still allowing plenty of room to explore. However, this middle section of the game is one massive fetch quest that I feel isn't paced well and is hard to figure out exactly where to go. First off, you can't do anything about the prince right now, so you just ignore him, and head off to the west. After fighting your way through the next area, you find yet another castle to the northwest. This particular king asks you to find his missing crown, so it's time to go exploring again. On the bottom level of the marsh cave, you'll find the king's crown surrounded by more enemies. So you fight your way back to the king, and he reveals that he's the dark elf Astos who cursed the elf prince in the first place.
What a twist!
However, to my eternal frustration, defeating Astos does not give you the item you need to lift the curse. Instead, you get a crystal eye in absolutely no direction where to go next. It turns out that you have to take the crystal eye back to the continent where you fought the pirates. In the northernmost part of that continent is a cave with a witch named Matoya who has lost her eye. If you give her the crystal eye, she will give you an herb that will cure the elven prince. That alone would take hours just to figure out by yourself, but the fetch quest doesn't end there. The elf prince gives you a mystic key. The mystic key opens up locked doors in the marsh cave and all of the castles you've been to before. So you go back to every single place you visited before and get new gear, which is cool, but now you don't know what you need to do next. Turns out that back in Corneria, the first town you ever visited, there is yet another hidden room. You go to the back of the castle and use the mystic key, and there you will find some nitro powder, or as it was known in the original game, some TNT, baby.
'Cause I'm TNT, I'm dynamite!
You then have to head to the west to find a cave full of dwarves. Give one of them the TNT you found, and he will open up passage to the rest of the map. The middle portion of this game just astounds me at how out of left field it really is. The game builds a nice pace up until the Elf Prince, and then it just swerves into Moon Logic territory. How are you supposed to know where Matoya is, and that she needs the Crystal Eye? How are you supposed to know where the secret room in Corneria is? Yes, you can find them with exploration, but that takes hours of time, and with no direction, I would imagine many people would get frustrated at this point, especially because strategy guides weren't around much at this point in time. Back then, people had to use the Nintendo helpline, which wasn't all that helpful, come to think of it.
Nintendo helpline, how may I help you? They don't pay me enough for this.
Yeah, hi. I have no idea where I'm supposed to go. I took this crown to an evil elf guy, and he tried to kill me for it, and all I have now is this crystal eye thing. Seriously, what am I supposed to do with it?
Let's see. Have you talked with the Elven Prince?
Yes, I've talked to the Elven Prince.
Did you give Astos back his crown?
Yes, I just told you that I did that.
Look, do you want help or not? I'm just going by the book here, buddy, and it says here that you need to find the witch, Matoya. She's to the north, somewhere. Go wander around for an hour and you'll find her.
Thanks, I think.
Thank you for calling Nintendo Helpline. Please do not call again.
I used a guide when I first played this part, simply because I had no idea what to do after I got the Crystal Eye, and no idea how to help the prince. Some of my friends have said they liked the exploration, but it just doesn't mesh with the rest of the game. Exploration is fine when you have direction and when you know what you're looking for. This just feels like a blind run to me. You have no idea at this point in the game where you're supposed to go.
You know, Zenith, you could just use the world map to figure out where you're going, right? It's as simple as Tickley's, Natub, Assad. Swish, swish, aroo!
Okay, I will admit that the world map does help you figure out where everything is. However, I used the world map, and I still had a hard time because they don't mark your next destination on the world map. You can go to places, sure, but you can't tell if this is where you really need to go at this specific point in the game. This is my least favorite part of Final Fantasy I. It just doesn't feel like the rest of the game, and I always rush through it to get to the second half, where the true story really begins. In the second half of the story, you start to see that the outside world is in pretty bad shape. I mean, while the early portions of the game are filled with monsters, for the most part the world looks lush and green. People live there in prosperity. In the outer continents, things aren't going too well. The earth is rotting, causing crops to wither and people to starve. Dormant volcanoes erupt, seas rage, winds swirl into great tornadoes.
Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies. Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes. The dead rising from the grave.
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria. Enough, I get the point.
All four elements are rampaging completely out of control. It's up to you to track down all four elemental crystals, destroy the fiends that guard them, and restore balance to the elements.
Only the Avatar can master all four elements and bring balance to the world.
In total, there are 4 fiends to destroy: Lich, the Fiend of Earth; Kali, or Merilith in the remakes, the Fiend of Fire; Kraken, the Fiend of Water; and Tiamat, the Fiend of Air. From this point on, it's extremely straightforward. You travel to a town, talk to the people, track down the dungeon of the fiend, and take the fiend out. There are usually some steps in between, but you are directed where to go next, either by the townsfolk or by the game itself. Each time you take out a fiend, a crystal is restored, and you see the effects it has on the rest of the game world. This gives you the feeling that you accomplished something major and makes you want to keep playing the game. In between fiends, there are small bits of story to help break up the formula. During the Earth Fiend dungeon, you meet up with a wise sage who tells you a bit more about your journey, and before the Fire Fiend, you meet Lucan, the man who made the prophecy about the Warriors of Light. Lucan gives you a canoe and gives you a cryptic message about the future.
I can see the future!
The rest of the sages also tell you a bit more about the fiends. After defeating Merilith, you have the opportunity to upgrade your gear once again. If you travel to the nearby ice cave and fight your way to the end, you'll find an item called a floater or a levistone in the remakes. With levistone in hand, you can travel to the Ryukon Desert on the southern tip of the continent and use it to raise an airship. The airship is one of the most iconic symbols of Final Fantasy. Every single Final Fantasy has the airship in some way, shape, or form, and it is extremely useful. The pirate ship lets you travel across lakes, and the canoe lets you travel down rivers, but the airship allows you to travel anywhere in the game world with ease. Also, since the airship floats over anything in its path, you don't have to worry about random encounters at all. The only real drawback is that you can only land on smooth green areas on the map. Even so, the airship is a powerful asset and one of the most important tools in any Final Fantasy. With airship in tow, you can now travel to the northern continents, which are all surrounded by mountain ranges. See, this is how you do progression, Final Fantasy. You allow exploration to other continents, but you can't progress further on these continents unless you have the necessary tools. Also, unlike the middle of the game, here you have direction. You know you have to defeat the 4 fiends, and talking to the townspeople will tell you where you need to go or what you need to do in order to progress. Direction like this is essential to progression in any RPG, which makes it all the more confusing to me that the middle of the game doesn't have any of this. Yes, I'm sure you can find out what you need to progress if you look long enough, but that's not as good as having a clear goal and knowing where to start. Anyway, the northern continent is brimming with many new places to explore. First of all, there's the Castle of Ordeal, an optional dungeon that provides you with the ultimate side quest. If you complete this dungeon, you are given the mystic rat tail. If you bring this item to the Cave of Bahamut, which is located on an island in the middle of nowhere, Bahamut will promote all of the characters in your party to the next rank. The warrior is upgraded to a knight, monk is upgraded to black belt, thief is upgraded to ninja, and the mages are all upgraded to fully fledged wizards.
You're a wizard, Harry.
Not only does this make your character stronger, but it also allows them to wield stronger weapons, use stronger magic, and just all around be cooler. This is the true highlight of Final Fantasy I for me. After all of your hard work getting to this point, the game rewards you by making your party more badass. The character models change to reflect the fact that you are now seasoned veterans, and the spells you get in this stage of the game kick some serious ass. When I played this sequence for the first time, I had spent some serious time investing in these characters. I had ground out some serious levels, and invested enough money to give them the best spells and gear possible. I loved this party, and when I saw them change into their new forms, I felt a massive sense of accomplishment. I really felt like I was rewarded for all of my effort. This part of the game may be optional, but to me, this is the epitome of the Dungeons and Dragons aesthetic that they were striving for, and I simply love every second of it. From this point onward, the game is fairly straightforward. You track down the remaining 2 fiends in their dungeons and take them out. The Kraken is in the Sunken Shrine, which is basically a recreation of Atlantis, and Tiamat is found in the Sky Fortress. By this point, your party should be strong enough to tackle these dungeons without too much effort. If you've upgraded your party and ground enough levels, nothing should cause you too much trouble at this stage in the game. That is, except for the hidden boss in the Sky Fortress. You see, most Final Fantasy games have an optional super boss hidden away somewhere that is stronger than the final boss of the game. Final Fantasy I has the War Mech. While the War Mech has been nerfed in some of the remakes, in most versions, he's a force to be reckoned with. If you aren't prepared for a fight, then your party will be annihilated very quickly. The problem is that the War Mech doesn't operate like most hidden bosses. Instead of going to a specific location and fighting him in an event, the War Mech is a random encounter like any other enemy. However, you can only encounter the War Mech in the Sky Fortress on the bridge leading to Tiamat, and he only has a 3 in 64 chance of appearing. This means you most likely won't encounter the war mech in any playthrough unless you get extremely unlucky and find him by accident. If that happened to you, I really hope you saved your game, because this guy will wreck your party like nobody's business.
Everyone died. The end.
The war mech regenerates health every single turn, has supremely powerful attacks, and in some versions of the game is stronger than the final boss of Final Fantasy I. But that's only if you're lucky, or unlucky enough to encounter him. I spent hours just trying to get this guy to appear in my playthrough of the game, but I did eventually find him. By that point though, my characters were leveled like crazy, and I ended up trouncing him. As far as super bosses go, he's not my favorite since he's really hard to find, but I really like the idea of the war mech. The hidden bosses will only get better from here on out. As for the fiends themselves, they're okay. I love the designs for the fiends, but I never found them too much of a challenge. The only one who really gave me trouble was the Lich, mostly because the Earth Dungeon likes to throw status ailments at you non-stop. Petrification and poison are abundant here, along with strong mini-bosses like the Vampire, so you'll most likely be weak by the time you reach the Lich. Then again, as long as you stock up on potions and gold needles, you should be fine. The Lich puts up a good fight, but he's not that formidable. Still, it's good to see a major D&D monster being used as a boss. Merilith and the Kraken, on the other hand, can be taken out easily with elemental attacks. Simply cast water spells at Merilith and lightning spells at the Kraken, and they will go down for real.
It's going down for real.
You can even equip elemental weapons to make these fights go by even faster. Tiamat doesn't have an elemental weakness, but by this point you should be strong enough to take care of things. Personally, Tiamat is my favorite of the 4 fiends. Based on a famous D&D monster, Tiamat is a multi-headed dragon that is the ultimate test for adventurers. It's a fun fight and definitely worthy of the final fiend. However, this game's not over just yet. Even though the crystals are restored, the world still hasn't been saved yet. A portal has opened in the Temple of Fiends, you know, the place where you fought Garland, and it takes you back in time 2,000 years into the past, where the 4 fiends are still very much alive, and apparently so is Garland. Now, I never thought this made much sense, but it turns out that the fiends in the past sent Garland back in time so that he could send the past fiends into the future.
The future is in the past!
This would, according to the game, cause a time loop and allow Garland and the fiends to live forever.
I have several questions.
I just don't get how this works. First of all, Garland was the first boss of the game. He's weak. How does he even pose a threat to us at this point? I know he's supposed to be this archdemon Chaos now, but he's still Garland, and yet now he's stronger than all 4 fiends combined? The hell? Second, if he was brought back in time, who did we fight? Shouldn't that have altered history so we didn't fight him at all? Alternatively, he could have been sent in time before we could kill him, but the game does not showcase this. Third, the fiends that we fought before were the future fiends. They clearly were just waking up from a long slumber. If we defeat them in the past, how would they still be alive to be defeated in the future?
Created a time paradox.
And on that same note, why are the fiends stronger in the past? I suppose that's because they were dormant for so long, but it still raises my eyebrows.
Look, I planned this.
So explain it. Yeah, explain your great plan.
All I had to do was invent time travel, then go back in time, And then the future would be better.
It's possible they're using multiverse theory instead of standard time travel.
That's actually even less plausible when you think about it. For those of you who don't know, there are actually a few different theories of time travel floating around these days. One of the most common theories is the butterfly effect. If you travel into the past, you alter events just by being there. So if the Fiends were destroyed in the past, they couldn't have existed in the future to wreak havoc on the world. It's a simple wave of cause and effect. Butterfly effect theory renders much of this ending void because by going into the past and destroying the Fiends in the first place, you are effectively stopping Garland before you ever fight him. So yeah, that doesn't make much sense. Multiverse theory is even more problematic. Multiverse theory states that by going back in time, you are not actually going back to your current timeline, but an alternate version of your universe. So, if Garland went back in time, he went to a different version of Final Fantasy entirely, where the Fiends were stronger in the past. This, however, would not alter Garland's current past. The Fiends would only be able to affect the Garland of that universe. They would never be able to create a time loop, since only one timeline can be altered in this case. There are a few other time travel theories, such as the Back to the Future theory, but none of them make sense in accordance with Garland's specific time loop. This entire time loop plot always makes me scratch my head. It was a nice idea to stretch out the game a little bit longer, but Garland was not the person to use for this. Zenith, you've got to come back to the past. Did I create a time loop again? No, it's your kids, Zenith, your kids. Your kids went back in time to stop Final Fantasy II from being made. Why would they want to do that? Well, you see, they couldn't beat the final boss. You know what? I have a retrospective to finish. This is future Zenith's problem. He can deal with it in his own time. Alright. But when the enraged fans find you, just remember, I tried to warn you. It's not my problem anymore. So, you defeat all four Fiends again, take down Garland, who has been renamed Chaos, and somehow become the strongest monster in the entire game, just go with it, and end the time loop before it can truly become the Final Fantasy. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but balance is restored to the world, and the four Warriors of Light return to their own time, finally able to rest. We are treated to some end credits, and thus the story of Final Fantasy I comes to a close. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the story of Final Fantasy I. I love the beginning, I love the second half of the Fiends, and I love the side quest with Bahamut, but the middle has a fetch quest that's just frustrating and lacks direction, and the ending makes no sense at all. I feel like they tried to use the middle fetch quest to pad the game a bit more, and the ending feels like a last-minute idea they threw into the game. What works about the story works well. The crystals, the setting, the Fiends trying to take over, that's all good build-up for the game, and I like how it really feels like your characters grow into the heroes they need to be to stop the forces of evil. But, and this is a big but, there are definitely parts of the story that haven't aged and feel rushed. They are few and far between, but they stand out like a sore thumb on an otherwise great game. I will give the game this though. This was an experiment for Square. They weren't used to telling these kinds of stories, so I can forgive them for a lot. They took risks, and they mostly paid off. As a first entry in the series, it's not going to be the best of stories, but it does lay the groundwork for what's to come next. Major franchise staples are crafted here, such as the crystals, airship, Bahamut, hidden super bosses, the white mage, and the black mage. These icons all started in this game and are remembered for a reason, but one of the major reasons this game is amazing is the music. Say what you will about Final Fantasy, there is no denying that the series has always had superb music. Every single entry in the series has a wonderful soundtrack, and Final Fantasy I is no exception. Like many entries in the series, the music for Final Fantasy I was composed by legendary composer Nobuo Uematsu. This was Uematsu's 16th game composition at this point, meaning he was a seasoned veteran even then, and it shows in spades. This is where many of the iconic Final Fantasy songs were created. The main theme music, battle music, and victory theme music of Final Fantasy all started here, and I have to say they still hold up after all these years. The music of Final Fantasy I is a triumph on so many levels, and I enjoy every moment of this wonderful soundtrack. Now, I actually had a chance to meet Nobuo in person a few years back at MagFest, and he is simply the most humble person I have ever met in my entire life. This guy is arguably the most famous composer in video game history, but he's extremely polite and loves interacting with fans. If you ever get the chance, check out his new band, the Earthbound Papas, because they simply rock. What more can I say? This music is iconic for a reason. It's video game composition at its finest, and I can find no fault here.
Really, Zenith? You can't find any fault with the music.
Soundbite? What are you doing here? I thought you were dead. Or possibly a Muppet.
Oh, Zenith, you should know a little thing like death can't stop me from reviewing. Whenever a Carly Rae Jepsen song appears, I'll be there. Whenever a movie about a cappella singers comes out, I'll be there. And whenever somebody needs me to cameo in their review because they got so much nostalgia around them that they can't properly critique the music, oh, don't you worry, I'll be there too.
This coming from the guy who hates everything. Hashtag Soundbite hates everything, hashtag deal with it.
Okay, maybe I've been a little bit harsh on songs in the past, and in the present, and probably in the future, but that doesn't change the fact, you know, this music has not aged as well as you think. I kind of feel a need to take all my clothes off and get into a spa while getting a facial. What I'm trying to say here is it's nice for background music, I suppose, but hardly iconic. What am I listening to here? It sounds like it wants to be a big military piece like you would hear at the end of Star Wars, but it also sounds like Link is traveling along trying to find a potion. It doesn't know what it wants to be. Does it want to be epic, or does it want to be background music? You have to choose. The violins sound good, but the whistling flutes make it sound like a video game rather than a world. As it stands, it sounds like it should be the beginning of a fun romp anime, which I would hate immediately.
Okay, you do have some good points there, but not all of these songs have aged poorly. What about the victory theme?
What do you want me to say about it? It's trumpets announcing victory. Although, I will say it's probably one of the most recognizable pieces of video game music outside of something like the Mario theme, which non-gamers would at least recognize. Well, I'm just not feeling it. Meh. It's not like you guys got any other choice besides me. It's not like a demon reviewer could just turn up from hell, whose job it is to specifically critique music, and come in and give a second opinion. That would be crazy!
What is it you wish?
Oh. I guess you can.
The music of Final Fantasy feels like the scope of the composition overtook the technology of the time. So much of it is orchestrated in this tinny, synth-heavy sound, which was par for the course in late 1980s video games. But you can still feel the grandeur inherent in it, even in spite of this. And some of the more softer or more ethereal sections, like the Prelude or Abandoned Castle, end up with this beautiful, elegant, and surreal quality. I really would like to hear this soundtrack performed by a full orchestra. I think that would give it the richness it deserves.
Final Fantasy has always been known for its music, and while I'm not a music reviewer myself, I can see both sides of the coin. On the one side, this music is extremely iconic, but on the other side, it has been a long time since these songs were made. Many won't like these songs, but most of us still do to this day. Either way, these songs are historically very important, and I'm thankful we got what we did. Last, but certainly not least, we have the gameplay. Gameplay is essential to any video game, especially back in the NES era. Nowadays, story has become just as important, but back then, story wasn't quite as big. Games like Castlevania, Mega Man, and Super Mario were the big success stories of the day, and they were 95% gameplay. Yes, they technically had a story, but the game focused its attention on making the game compelling to play. While Final Fantasy I had placed much more attention on its story than usual, its gameplay is no slouch. The core gameplay of Final Fantasy I is the tried and true turn-based fighting mechanic, which is also based on Dungeons & Dragons. Every character is lined up and gets a chance to attack. Once you have chosen each party member's attack, they will attack the enemies one at a time until the enemies are defeated. However, each enemy gets a chance to attack as well, so it might be beneficial to guard or use protective spells. This old school, tried and true formula may be old hat to us now, but back when this game was released, it was revolutionary. It changed the way people thought about combat for the better. The system wasn't perfect though. One major problem with the original game was that your party members would always attack the enemy you selected, even if you had already killed them. If one of your selected enemies had been killed by another party member, The rest of your party would attack the empty air. This completely ridiculous idea was thrown out in the remakes, where instead of attacking thin air, your party will attack another random enemy. I much prefer the system in the remake because it's just silly thinking of people actually attacking empty air. Another problem with the original game, and some of the remakes, is the lack of MP. You see, in order to cast any spells, you need MP, or magic points. Early spells don't cost that much, but later spells like Firaga and Firaja cost a lot to cast. Unfortunately, the NES and Origins version of Final Fantasy I don't give your characters much MP to work with. You are very restricted, and so it's hard to justify using spells often. I know this is part of the D&D feel, because D&D restricts spells greatly in certain versions of the system, but personally, I don't like the system myself. Even Dungeons & Dragons has updated their mage classes to allow for more casting, and I much prefer later remakes which fix the MP balance to allow greater use of magic. The Final Fantasy I Anniversary Edition for PSP has the best MP balance in my experience, so I would recommend that for any people who haven't played the original game. With all of that said, I still think Final Fantasy I has a wonderful battle system. It may seem old-fashioned to some people, and it certainly is starting to show its age, but it is supremely addicting. Random encounters to me have an air of suspense about them. You never know when an enemy is going to attack, so when they do, it's always a surprise. Random encounters may seem weird to people nowadays, but I find them realistic. In Dungeons & Dragons, the moment you first enter a room, the first thing you do is get ready for an enemy ambush. It's the same thing in the field in Final Fantasy. You never know when you'll get attacked, so you better be prepared. Granted, this system isn't perfect. There are times when you will get attacked every 2 steps, and that can get annoying when you're trying to return to a town to heal up. I have heard reports from many of my friends that the random encounters in Final Fantasy I are far too often in certain areas, and I can certainly see that. Personally, I'm used to this system because of all the times I played Pokemon, but I don't think everyone will like random encounters in this style. Yes, plenty of people love it because of Pokemon, but this system is a bit older and more experimental. Not everything had been finalized just yet, and it really shows here. Still, for the first game in the series, this system caught on incredibly fast and helped to make this game an instant classic. Is it perfect? No, but it's still addicting and incredibly fun. So everyone, that is Final Fantasy I. How did it hold up? Pretty well, actually. While I do have legitimate problems with the story, that's not really what Final Fantasy I is all about. The first Final Fantasy is about exploration. It's about investing time in creating a party of characters and making the adventure your own. This is truly a remarkable adaptation of Dungeons & Dragons, from the elemental weaknesses to the bosses, the random encounters to the class system, and everything in between. Yes, it doesn't fully capture the freedom of D&D, but this is a great stepping stone. There's a lot of fun to be had with Final Fantasy I, and there's a lot of replay value even today. Is it perfect? No. But it does hold up extremely well as an excellent old-school RPG. I don't plan to play it again anytime soon, because I just played it 3 times this year, but I always enjoy my time with the game, and I recommend it to any fan of old-school RPGs, D&D fans, and yes, even Pokemon fans. Give Final Fantasy I a try. You might be pleasantly surprised. But don't just take my word for it. My friend Test Zero recently streamed his playthrough of Final Fantasy I. Zero, what do you think of the game?
Ah yes, the original Final Fantasy.
It wasn't the first one I played, but it's definitely one of my favorite in the series. Also probably one of my favorite NES games. I think the thing I love most about it is how different it is from the other games that came out at the time. And honestly, I think the Dawn of Souls version kind of ruined a lot of what made the original game so unique. It doesn't stand out as much, it's just kind of a standard RPG at that point. It's definitely one of the harder games in the series, and that's kind of what I like about it. You can even adjust the difficulty further depending on the party you pick at the start. During my stream I chose to use 2 black belts, which meant a lot less money needed for equipment and more that could be spent on magic and healing items. But I've even played through the game with a single warrior and all the other party members dead, because then he gets 4 times the XP as usual. It's a very versatile system. It was a great way to start off Final Fantasy Fest. I'm doing FF4 right now, although knowing the way Zenith works I'll probably be up to 5 or 6 by the time this video comes out. Anyway, come stop by my stream or check out the VODs if you want to see more. I'll be playing through all 12 games in the main series, one each month. Ha! I just snuck a plug into your episode, Zenith. TZ way!
Now, there are many different versions of Final Fantasy I. This game is available on just about every single console you can imagine. While purists will want to get a hold of the original NES version, cartridges that are in good shape range from $84 to $255. This is one of the more expensive games on the NES due to its rarity. The game came over to America in 1990 and was met with modest success, mostly due to the aggressive marketing campaign for the game, but it didn't quite become the hit it was in Japan, meaning fewer carts were made available here. While I do think it's worth a purchase for collectors, I don't think the price is worth it for anyone else. The original is a great game, but it had far more faults than the remakes. As for me, I own 2 different versions of Final Fantasy I, the Final Fantasy Origins Collection on PSN, and the Final Fantasy I Anniversary Edition on PSP. Final Fantasy Origins is a PlayStation 1 remake that contains both Final Fantasy I and Final Fantasy II. Origins is great for collectors because you get 2 games for a relatively low price point, and it's all contained on one disc. The PS1 version of Origins is available online for around $10, although you will have to be careful with it because PS1 discs are notorious for scratching and becoming extremely unplayable. The PSN version of Origins is available for $4.99, containing the same features and is much easier to manage because it's completely digital. If you want Origins, the PSN version is your best bet. While I do like Origins, I'm not too big a fan of the old school MP system in the game. It's a great version of Final Fantasy I, but it's not my favorite. I much prefer the Final Fantasy Anniversary Edition for PSP. The game is available online for around $10 and requires a PSP to play, but this is my definitive edition of the game. Not only does it feature all of the graphical updates and gameplay fixes that Origins has, but it also gives us a few new features. The MP system has been retooled and rebalanced for better spellcasting. An additional dungeon is available to explore once you beat the game. There's support for 16:9 widescreen view, and just all around better presentation here. Sure, it only includes the one game, but the features alone make this highly worth your money if you're a PSP owner. So everyone, that's my retrospective of Final Fantasy I. Next time I'll be taking a look at Final Fantasy II, the sequel that took even more risks than its predecessor, the game that dared to be completely different, even in America. But we'll get to that game next time.
Oh, I don't think you will, Zenith.
Oh god. What is it this time?
Do you remember me? I was once known as a knight of Cornelia. 30 minutes from now, you killed me. I am Garland.
Dude, I already kicked your ass twice in the present. Do I seriously have to do it again?
Oh, you did defeat me, but the 4 great forces saved me by sending me back through time. Once here, I sent the 4 fiends into the future, where they shall once again use the 4 great forces to send me back into the past. In 30 minutes, I will remember none of this. but I will be reborn again here. So even as you die, again and again, I shall return! Born again into this endless circle I have created.
Okay, Garland, I'm gonna say this for your own benefit. You are making no sense right now. This plan isn't going to work for two reasons. One, time travel doesn't work that way. Two, I'm not going to fight you.
What? But you must kill me to create the time loop.
Sorry, that's future Zenith's problem. Besides, if I don't fight you now, you can't be reborn. Time loop severed, buddy. I believe this means you don't exist in this timeline right now. Goodbye, Garland. It was nice knowing you.
But I mean, that doesn't even... Oh, crap.
The time loop was severed at last. The endless struggle that raged over 30 minutes had ended, and peace prevailed once more. The light of the four crystals restored the forces of wind, water, earth, and fire. It was a mere trick of fate that had given rise to the chain of Garland's wrath. But magnified by the Zenith meant to guide our world, that trick of fate also gave birth to the fiends. Monsters ran rampant, and the world sank into darkness. But all that is now past. With the four forces flowing as they were meant, Zenith prepared to cross time and return to the world he knew. A world where Princess Sarah, Queen Jane, and even Garland himself await. When was it that time fell into its spiraling loop? When was that fateful day? None can say. It seemed the cycle into which time had fallen would last forever. But the bravery of Zenith prevailed. He grasped the forces that filled the world with darkness and used them to restore it to the light. No one will ever recall the struggle Zenith endured, for the breaking of the chain means that it never existed. But in the tales of fantasy that people tell one another, the memory of his deed will live on. Tales of dwarves and elves, of dragons and shining civilizations that reached for the very heavens even as they fell. Now he returns to us. With the memory of his struggle buried deep in his heart, Zenith will quietly watch over the world. Remember always that the forces of the world must be used as they were intended. That the power of light must never be used for dark, and that the true crystals reside in your heart. For you are the warrior who crossed time. You are the bringer of light.
So, Zenith hasn't heard of the review court. Well, I suppose we'll have to fix that, won't we? Let's see what the Empress has to say of your ignorance.
Thank you for watching the Media Meltdown. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more awesome videos. And if you like what you see, show your support on the Patreon page at patreon.com/Media Meltdown. See you all next time on the Media Meltdown.
Zenith hasn't heard of the review court.
Me? Nah,